All right, we're back, and it's COMP397, Web Game Programming, Week 5, Lesson 5, Part 3. And if you notice, some of you have different, it comes up differently for some of you than for me. Why? If I go back into TypeScript, right, and if I say get TypeScript now, right, here on the TypeScript website, right, down here, look what it says. Get TypeScript 1.5 beta for Visual Studio 2013. Please do that. That means you can match up to what I have. If you haven't done this piece, which I kind of showed it to you last time, right, you won't have it won't look like mine. So please update your TypeScript to 1.5 beta. All right? Again, it's very, very important that you try and do it on your own as opposed to use the one in front of you. However, you can still make yours work with the same steps. It'll just look a little different with your previous version of TypeScript. Okay, let's go back to my repository. One thing I want to do is I want to update my repo now because I did some changes. I added a button, right? And I want you guys to have my changes. So I'm going to go into Stop Debugging. I'm going to pull up my Solution Explorer. I'm going to pin it. I'm going to go down to Team Explorer, right? I'm going to go to Changes. And now if you notice, I have added a bunch of changes. This button class has been added. I also have some untracked files. I don't want to have any untracked files, so I'll click Add All. All right, in here I'm going to say added button class. That's what I did with my commit, right? Okay, cool. I committed it locally. Now I got to commit it to the remote repository. So I'm going to go to Unsync Commits and click Sync. Again, this is the very simplest way to do it. And if I check my repository now, I'm going to go into my GitHub, right? And I'll go into my repositories and I'll click my top repository there, which would be my calculator. If you notice, if I go into my calculator, into my scripts, into my objects, I should have my button class, right? There's my button class as I've typed it. All right, so this is where if you want to just duplicate what I have, as you're watching along the videos, if you're that kind of person and you watch instead of do, right, and you want to do it on your own at home, then this is the code you can check. You can cross-check against my code to make sure that your code matches mine. Okay, so that's done. I think we've done this piece, but we've added one button. This is cool. And now I want to add a label class, right? Because look, I'm going to have more than one label. Right now I have this one that says game is running. Let's get rid of this thing. This is a console log, right? And I got my hello label, thank you, right? And I want to add in my label class. I think these two are really good utility classes, right, that we can use over and over again in our game, right? Especially in our calculator, right? So in my label, this label itself, right, I mean, there's a couple of ways to approach this. The first thing is leave it as is. If I leave it as is, then I have to define my regex and reg-y values manually, right? Which might be okay, right? Especially if I don't have a lot of labels. But if I expect to have a lot of labels in my code, right, maybe it's a good idea to have them, right? Just as a exercise, not because we need it. Let's make a label class, just like we did the button class, just for an additional example, right? All right, so let's go back into our Solution Explorer. Okay, I'm going to go into my objects. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to add in, this is step number 1, right? Now, actually, it would be step 2, because step 1, we've already made a folder, right? Step 2, I'm going to add in a new TypeScript file. And in my TypeScript file, I'm going to call this thing label, right? And now my TypeScript file is empty. Oh, man. Okay, well, this is good. What's my first word? We just did this thing, so I'm going to ask people next to me, what's the first thing I need to do to make my module? Hi. Yes, I'm looking at you. Yes. What's my first thing I need to make my module? What's my syntax? What do I type? Module. Label. And what my label is, in this particular case, it's called objects, right? So I'm adding it on to my objects module because it's inside my objects. Think about the modules almost like my folder, all right? My namespace, right? And I need to put these curly braces. So I'm saying add on to the objects module, number 1. 2, okay, I want to create a new class. I need what keyword to make sure that the class is visible? Export. It's very important that I use export. Okay. Next, when I define my class, what's the next keyword that I need to use to make sure that I'm defining my class? Class. I need that. And then the name of my class, which is capital L for label, which is this our convention, right? Then I need to use my 2 curly braces. So this is my new label class, right? Okay, cool. I need, hey, wait a minute. My label class, is it going to extend or inherit from the default, something default? Yes, it will. It's going to inherit from the text object. It's a display object, right? So I'm going to say extends, right? Create.js. So we're going to skip that step. Dot text, right? So now it's going to be called label for us. Because I've been extending, right? I need a constructor, right? And my constructor, inside my constructor, I need to send in my super class. I need to have a kind of a reference to my super constructor. My super class is constructor, right? Okay, I'm just building off this is just my scaffold, okay? So I don't have anything yet, okay? Well, here's a problem, right? Every time I'm going to mention my label, I need to mention my font. I have to have a font. I have to have a font size, right? These are things I need to have. I need to have a font color, font size, color, whatever. You know what? I don't want to keep on remembering all these things, which means I'm probably going to need some kind of constants that I can use all the time. Well, what better place to put my constants than up here, right, inside a module? But I don't want to put them in the objects module. Where would I want to put this? Well, in its own module. Let's make a new module now, just to confuse you even more. So inside my scripts, I'm going to create a new folder, add, new folder. This is the way we create, I prefer to create a new module. You don't have to do it this way, by the way, but I do it from a structure perspective. Let's call this module config. So this is our configuration module. And the configuration module is going to hold other objects that are pertinent to the configuration of my game. Okay, like for example, my constants. All right? Okay, cool. Inside my config module, I haven't finished making my label yet, but I need my config module to work in order for me to make my label, as you'll see in a second. Let's do this. So in my config module, I'm going to right click. I'm going to say add, right? New TypeScript file. And we're going to call this file config. Constants. Here's my constants. Okay, inside here, it's a new module, right? And we're going to say module, right? Config. That's what the module is going to be called. And inside my config, well, my constants aren't going to be a class, right? I don't need a constants class. That makes no sense. I need constants, like actually variables. So now this is where we can use the export keyword to export individual variables that are held as containers throughout my entire code. It's almost like global variables, but what we're doing here is actually creating, putting them inside my config module. So I'm actually creating a namespace for all my constants. That's what I'm doing. Okay, cool. So how do I access this thing? It's called the constants variable, but I'm actually going to make it call. You're going to access it via config. That's what it's going to be called, right? Okay, so I'm going to have my export keyword, and I need my font constants. My first font constant is going to be called the font size, right? So I'm going to say my name of my variable, so font size, right? And the type of it, what's my font size? It's going to be of type string, right? And I'm going to actually kind of make it what it is, right? So my font size, my default font size, I'm going to make it so that it's a certain size. Well, that's cool, right? If I only had one font size. But what if I want multiple font sizes, like 40 or 60 or whatever? So for now, I think what's smart for us to do is make our font size different sizes. Instead of font size, I'm going to call it small, medium, and large, something like that. So font small, right? We're going to make it so it's 20 pixels, let's say. That's our small font. We can make it smaller than that. It doesn't have to be in all fonts, in all caps, but I need my var keyword because I'm declaring a variable, right? That's what I'm doing here. I'm not declaring a class, right? It doesn't have to be. This is a convention. We're just making it so that all constants have caps right now, right? Okay, let's do the same thing. Export. I'm going to use the export keyword again, right? Why? Because each one of these variables have to be visible, right? Font medium, right? It's going to be a type string, and let's say we're going to make it 40 pixels, right? And export var font large, right? A string, and we're going to make it also 60 pixels, so every 20 pixels. That's quite large. Okay, now we can make as many gradients of this as you want. I also want to put some kind of comment. So this is like our, font constants, right? That's what these things are. Okay, so we got our font constants. I need my font family, right? So I'm going to say export var font family. Right. Our default font family is going to be called, for now, I'm going to make it Consolus. You can make it whatever you want, right? Consolus, right? Smart thing to do would be this. If you had some font families you wanted to use, right, as defaults, you could put it, instead of font family, you can say font Consolus, font Arial, font whatever, and then it would have the Consolus keyword in there. So you don't have to remember these things. They're just in there. Okay, cool. Export var. And then we got our font size, our font family, right? Now we need our font color, right? Well, you know what? I don't want to make it's just a font color. I might use these colors somewhere else. So we're going to make another section over here called color constants, right? So var export, right? And we'll say, just so we know, black, right, is going to be a string, right? And it's going to be hash 000000, right? That's black. And let's do the same thing for the other ones. All right, so we'll make it white, just in case we need white. Just defining these. You can make these or not. It's up to you. FF. You can also use 3 Fs like we did in regular CSS. Let's say yellow, right, is equal to FF00. And let's do the other ones. Red, green, and blue, right? Red string is equal to FF0000. And you see where I'm going, right? Green string, oops, 00 FF00. And blue is equal to hash 0000 FF, right? Okay, cool. All we're doing is defining constants for these things. So when I actually access, the fonts, I don't have to try and remember the code, the hash code. I can just put black, white, yellow, red, blue, green, or whatever, right? How do I use these now? Well, there's two things. I've created a module, and whenever I create a module, I have to include it in my index.html. So that's the next step. So next step is this. I'm going to pin this thing. I'm going to go to my index.html. Right? I've created my module, but it is not a class. And if I go back to my constants for a second, right, in my config, sorry, one thing I forgot to show you. If I save everything and cross-compile, look what I get. It's just a closure, right, with a bunch of properties. That's all it is. That's what it looks like in JavaScript. Okay, so I'm not doing anything different here. I'm just making it so that there's some global definitions for these different constants I've created. Right, that's all I'm doing. To make the code cleaner. That's what I'm making it. That's why I'm using that. Okay. So let's go back into my index. Well, okay, I want to use my constants, my config, and you know what? It's probably good practice to put this thing first before anything else, because I want maybe my button one day to have my access to my constants, and definitely my game script and any other script. So I want to kind of drag and drop my constants in here. And if you notice, it takes on the right path. Scripts.config constants. Okay, cool. Now in my game.ts file, I want to have access to these constants. So I want to have them before my button. So I'm going to kind of drag and drop this before my button. So I have a reference now to my constants, which are before my button. Okay, cool. Now, because I have them there, right? If I go, my constants is complete, by the way. I can close this up. I'll keep it open for a reason. You'll see it later on. But I don't have to keep it open right now. Whatever I've got in here works. Okay, let me show you. Let me prove it to you. Let's go back to my label. Well, I know that when I create my text, I need a font size, font family, and I need the message, whatever the label is going to say, right? I need those things when I create my label. So let's do that. In my superclass, it needs kind of the label string. That's what it needs. It also needs, I don't have that yet, it needs my font itself. It just calls for font. But font requires font size and font family. Well, guess what? I have that. How do I access it? Well, config, right, dot, and my font size. Let's make it so that my typical font size is small, right? I want to use this small plus a space, right, plus my font family, config dot font family, right, which is right now Consolas, right? That's our default font family, to be even. Okay, cool, comma, and then my font color, which I want to make, for now, black. So config dot black, right? I don't have my label string, right, because I need to get it from my constructor, right? So I'm going to say label string, right, is of type string. And I'm listening for my label string from my constructor. And then it's going to tape this, yes? Sorry, where? This? Because the way the superclass works is font family and font size is one string. So all I'm doing is concatenating font small plus a space and plus the font family, because that's how the string should look, yeah. What export keyword? What do you mean? Here? For the class. So the class is available outside of this document. It's available to my to the rest of my namespace, right? If I don't use the export keyword, it's only locked inside my module. That means my variables and my classes that I define in my module, they're inside only in that module, and that's it. So sometimes it's important to do that. Sometimes you want to make it so that the module doesn't share stuff that's outside of it. You want to make it so it's self-contained. In this particular case, I want to export my whole class out so that it's available to the rest of my code. It's like public, but because I'm modularizing it, I'm putting it in different files and in different directories. It allows me to share it amongst my entire application. That's what it does. Okay. More of that, if you want to look at the TypeScript specification, it'll tell you exactly what it does. Right. All right. I want to save this thing. When I do, if you look at the right, this is what it actually does right now. Take a look. Rah! It's crazy, right? All this stuff for these lines of code, right? Okay, cool. And that's what this superclass does. It actually, uses the label, right? I pass in the label string, whatever my label message is. Maybe my label string is incorrect. Maybe I should just call it message, right? Because that makes more sense, right? So the message that I'm kind of putting out, or my label text will be the other way of saying it. Here, let's change that up, just because that's really what it is. Here, I'm being indecisive this morning, right? Label text. That's what it is. This label text is the stuff we want to show on the label, right? Okay, cool. This is a great place in my constructor if I want to change my regx and reg y values. But just to keep it so we can see that it works, and we'll replace my text with my label. We'll make some changes here. I'm going to kind of save this change. Okay, I'm not finished. Even though I've defined my label, I still haven't connected it to my application because I need to do that in my index.html. So let's do that. So I'm going to go back to index.html. I'm not finished my label, by the way. I'm just pausing right here to show you that it works. And I want to put my label after my button, let's say, or before my button, doesn't matter, right? If I want it to be accessible to my button, I want to put it before. And sometimes you might see some developers putting their label first. So that way, if they want to include a label with their button, then it would be defined first. So let's do that. Let's make it before. So I'm going to kind of take my label, right, which is here in my objects folder, and drag and drop it in before my button. Okay, cool. So now it's there, but I still got to connect it to my game class. So here's my game. Here's my constants. I'm going to take my label, drag and drop it in here. So now I have access to my label. Okay, cool. I haven't used my label yet. Let's use it. Well, I have a kind of a label down here. It's called hello label, right? And I defined it up here, right? hello label is of type create as text. Well, let's change this to label. So let's do that. So let's say objects dot label. There's two objects now, button and label, right? And this is cool. If I go down, right, instead of text, I want to change this thing to new objects dot label. Objects dot label, right? And I need to use hello world, and that's it, right? That's all I need to send in there, hello world, right? And this stuff can stay the same because hello world get measured with and all this kind of stuff is part of the label definition. So if everything goes well, then all I've done is rename my text to label. And I've taken away some other things, other options here for font and size, font and color, right? Because I'm saying all my label objects are 20 pixels big, and all my label objects are of type consolis right now, because I've made that as part of my label class. Here's my label class right here, right? So all I'm doing is replacing my stuff with my label class. Well, this is great, you know, and this is okay. First of all, let's see if it works, right? So I'm going to kind of run this whole thing, and if everything works, then we should still have hello world, right? But smaller, because I made it 20, right, instead of 60. Okay, well, that's good, but that means we're kind of fixed to this 20 point, and I want to make it so that it's bigger, right? How do I do that? How do I make it so that I can make it so it's variable? Well, if I go there, I might as well use a text field, right? I can't go back to text because it's almost exactly the same, right? So I could make it so that I could change my label font. I could do that at times if I want to do that. And how do I do that? Well, because my label class is a text object, I can do that. And because my label class is a text object, I can definitely change the text, the font. I can configure everything outside of this class as well. I could do that, right? The more I configure in my label class, right, the less I have to do outside of it, right? So I don't have to duplicate my efforts over and over again. Okay, if I want to change my registration values, as an example, to the middle of my object, and I want to do it here for all labels, that can be good and bad. It's good if I'm making labels that are like headlines, like they're kind of like, you know, centered labels, right? It's bad if I want to make labels that sit inside of another container, right? So this is where this example falls flat because, I mean, I'm just showing you how to make an additional object. If I make it so that I set the registration value of all my labels, every one of my labels, to the left or to the middle, that means that the middle is where I'm going to have to define my label, not the top left. And typically we want text to start off on the left when we start typing things out, right? So for this example, we'll make it happen. It may not make sense, but I want to show you that it works. All right? So let's try this out. So here, all this stuff here, regx, regy, x, and y, maybe my x and y value I want to put in here too for labels. So that's one thing that it can help us with. So we're going to say in my constructor, I'm just going to unpin this one so you can see it. I'm also going to listen for an x and a y value. And the x and y value are going to be both numbers, right? Just like we did before, number, number. I'm just defining them, right? So here's my x and y values. Now that I get them, I can assign them. So I can say something like this. I can say this dot x is equal to x, and this dot y is equal to y, right? Now once I've done that, that helps. That's helpful. So I can go back to my game.ts file down here, and if you notice now it's listening for two more values that I haven't given it. So 160 for my x value, and 190 for my y value, which means I can get rid of these two things. Right? So I put them up here instead. Okay, there's my regx and reg-y. That's still the same. Let's check to see if that still works. If I'm still able to see my changes. So I'm going to kind of stop debugging here, and then you notice it's the same. There's no difference, right? Still in the middle. Okay, that's cool. I like that as an option. Now my regx and reg-y values, if you will, that kind of makes it so that it's always, my registration values are always in the middle, right? If I put these two lines in. Well, you know what? I want to make it so that if I want to put my registration values in all the time, I'm going to make it a Boolean variable that I'm going to listen for. And if I set this variable to true, right? Regex and reg-y in the middle, then I'll set them in the middle. Otherwise, I won't, right? How do I do that? I'm going to be listening for a true or false. In this particular case, I'm going to say it's true. Okay? But my class right now doesn't take it a true or false value. I've got to define it. So I'm going to go back to my label, and I'm going to listen for a Boolean value, right? And it's going to be called like centered. I'm going to call it centered. Does that make sense? And it's going to be of type Boolean, right? I'll make this a little smaller so you guys can see it in one line. No, that's not what I wanted. There, that's what I wanted. Makes sense? So I'm taking my label text, my x and y value, and a Boolean that's called centered. Is it centered? That's what I'm asking. Yes or no? If it's centered, if I say yes, then I want to use those regex and reg-y capabilities. If not, ignore it and just have my regular default regex and reg-y. All right? So how do I do that? I make a conditional statement. If centered, right? I could put is equal to true. I could put that, but that's just redundant. I just can just say if centered, right? If centered, then set my regex and reg-y values in the middle like I did over here in my game. So let's go back to game. I'm just going to grab this so I don't have to retype it. I'm going to kind of cut it. I'm going to put it in my label, paste. And instead of hello label, it's not going to be hello label. It's going to be this, right? Because I'm referring to all labels. Make sense? So I'm checking to see if I want to center my label. If I want to center my label, then I switch on, I turn the switch on, centered, yes or true or false, right? If it's off, right, then, or if it's false, then I don't center it, and it becomes, it's the default top left corner of the label, all right? This gives me a lot more control. All right, cool. That's the first thing. So now I have a true value. I've taken that stuff away from here, from my label. Let's see, we should basically see the exact same thing. Let's just check to see that if that's true. If I've done everything correctly and I recompile everything, then I'm just going to see the exact same thing. Yeah. Okay. To test this, let's take the centered. Let's change it from true to false, right? And I'm going to save everything. And again, I'm just going to refresh my debugging. And now you see, if you notice, it starts here, and that's the difference. I haven't centered it. My center, or my pivot point, is at the top left corner of my font now, right? And that's what this does. I've set it up so that way if I want to center it, I can put true in there. If I don't want to center it, I can make false. So now my label is much more powerful than it was before because it includes all the things I want. Make sense? Okay, so I've got my label. It's functional. I want to make it true. And let's start building out my the rest of my calculator for the rest of the class really quickly. So remember, my class, my calculator has a background image, right? And I want to add it in, right? So I want to add this background image first because anything I add in here, I want to get rid of this hello label because I don't need it anymore, right? I was just using it as an illustration, right? I'm really building up my calculator now. Let's take a look. I don't need this comment anymore because I don't have a callback function that's for my alpha transparency. It's part of my button class, right? And I'm using my this pink button clicked event, right? Well, I don't have a pink button clicked event. I have a plus button click event. I'm using the pink button click event for that. So I'm just going to change this to plus button, and this one to plus button because hasn't been changed, right? So my plus button clicked event sounds like a bing, like that bing sound, right? That's cool. This is the wrong position for my plus button. We're going to get that positioning in a second. But the first thing I want to add in is my background. So I'll say add calculator background. And we're going to make it so it's a global variable again, so we can access it if I need to, right? So instead of my hello label, I'm going to call this my background, right? And it's of type createjs.bitmap because it's just a bitmap, right? Okay, here's my background. And I'm going to say my background image then is equal to a new createjs.bitmap image. And the bitmap string is going to be this thing called background, which is assets.getResult. Right? We didn't define this yet, but I'm going to call it background, right? And that's where I want it to be. It's going to kind of come into my top left corner of my screen, right? And I'm going to say stage.addChild's background. That's where it's going to go. It's going to go in the top left corner of my screen, right? Okay, but I need to define it up here, right? Because I got my plus button, but I don't have my background. Let's just define it as another piece of my manifest, right? So I'm going to call this thing, the first one, black background. And if I'm not wrong, let's just pin my Solution Explorer on again for a second. If I look at my assets, images, I should have a background.ping image, which I do. It's just this gray background for now, right? So I'm going to call it background. Okay, to test this out, if I've done everything correctly, right? I've added in my background, and then I have my plus button in the wrong position. Let's just try it out. So I'm going to run this thing. You should see a gray background with a plus button, right? There we go. Gray button and plus button, as you see, right? Huh? As normal. Okay, but this plus button isn't in the right position. Where should my plus button be? Well, if I look over at my tooling, my plus button, and again, I would typically not do this. I would have an Excel document with all my buttons enumerated here, right? But I can look at my fireworks. And here it looks like it should be a 240 by 110. That's where my plus button should be. So let's put it there. So I'm going to go to my Visual Studio. I'm going a little fast, but I'm going to try and get this done for you. 240 by 110. This is where my plus button should be. And if I refresh now, right, my view, and re-debug, then my plus button is in the right position. Yeah? This is where my plus button should be, according to my document. Okay, cool. I need this piece, all these other buttons, right? So let's add them in quickly. So we're going to do that as I go. So my background first. Then I want to have my calc container. In fact, maybe what we should do right away is I'm going to pin this up. I'm also going to stop debugging, right? And all these piece parts I should add in to my my manifest, right? So here's my background. I'm going to make a couple of copies of this thing, right? And the next one is going to be my calc container. So we're just going to call this calc container, right? And if you notice, I've named it the exact same way. So calc container, I can just get rid of this, put that there. Next one. It's all in your assets. If you've copied my file, it should be there for you, right? My calculator I don't need because that's just my completed calculator. I put there just for you to have everything if you needed it, the exact layout. My divide button is what I need now. So my divide button is my divide button. So I'm just going to add that in too. And the next one is my 8 button. I'll put it in order, right? Oops. I meant to do one of these. So my 8 button. And my 8 button is going to be over here. I'm going to keep going right now. See what I'm doing, right, guys? All I'm doing is I'm expanding my manifest to include additional assets. Equals button. This is getting tedious. And by the way, there's a faster way of doing this, a much better way to do this. Of course, always, right? And Ali is going to do it for us because he's smarter than everybody, right? So he's going to show us how to do it all. Right there. I love that confidence. What do you mean? Don't do it. 5 button. You're going to be perfect after this, Ali. You're going to be a developer. I'll make a developer of you yet. Let's keep doing this, guys. 4 button. And I'm going to update this. I'm going to update my GitHub for those people who are just watching so that you don't have to do all this work. Because if you're a little bit lazy like I am, you can just copy and paste. My 4 button, and here's my minus button. I'm just doing it in order. And my multiply button comes next. Multiply button. And then my 9 button. I know this is getting tedious, but I want you guys to practice it anyway because it's a good practice to understand how the manifest works. It's just a JSON file. That's really what it is. And keep going with my 1 button. Let's keep going. I would invite you to try and practice this piece because this is an easy piece to do. I've got my plus button, right? So I don't have to do that. Let me just cut that out of there. Oops. And underneath my plus button, I'm going to put the next one, which is my 7 button. And underneath that is my 6 button. Again, they're almost there, man. Come on. Bear with me now. Okay, and my skin, which I'm going to leave off because I don't need my skin. Skinning is just like the completed object without any kind of separation, right? So I've just kind of put that in there just for you to have all my assets. That's how I'm putting it there for you, right? And my 3 button goes next. And you don't have to do this in order, but I'm doing it in order only because it just makes it easier so I know that I've got everything. Right? And my 2 button. So after you've done this tedious exercise, I'm going to tell you there's an easier way. But I want to show you, we have to do this really tedious exercise first, right? And then so you realize there's lots of little piece parts to this whole thing. And there's a much better way of doing this later on. We won't handle it this week. We'll do it next week. Okay, so I've got all my assets from my calculator. They're all there. And now I can access them by including them down here, right? So I've got my background. I've got my plus button. Now I'm going to go back here and start adding my calc container, my 7, my 8, my 9, right? So let's do that. So up here, inside my, my game variables, let's add them in, right? So of course the fastest way to do that is to copy and paste. I've got my thing, and I'm going to name them the exact same names, right? So we're going to do one of these, var calc container. You're going to see how poor this is in a second. Now my calc container is a bitmap, right? It's not a button, all right? My divide button is a button, so I need that one in. Here's a button. So var divide button is of objects.button, and the same thing goes with my 8 button. Why am I doing 2 different things? Ali, why am I kind of, what's up here? What's this piece up here compared to this piece down here? How come I'm doing both things?
That one you're just getting it in manifest, and this one you're going to use it to position it, right?
You're close. This one, right, up here, this manifest up here, this array of objects, is just, the IDs are all the aliases for all the path names, right? And then these ones are my actual objects that I'm going to instantiate and create and put onto my stage. So, in fact, yes, you're correct, but only partially so. But that's okay, because you're getting better. All right, so I'm going to get my equals button. I could. Just to make you happy. How about that? I'll do that. Equals button, and then my 5 button. Is that what you want me to do? No. I like your thinking, but no. Let's take this button here. Tell me, what do you want me to do? I could write 4, but then, you know, there's also problem with finger typing problems, which I want to avoid as much as possible, because I'm notoriously bad at typing, like many of you, right? So I find it's easier to cut and paste, then it's exactly the same, and there's a lesser chance of making errors, right? Then unless you're copying and pasting your error over and over again, that's bad. That's just as bad, right? So it's important not to do that. But yes, this method of doing it is a little faster than typing each one of them individually, but we're going to get there eventually. As I do this, and you guys are watching me paint the walls, right? As I like to say, watching paint peel. It's a good exercise so you can see that the process that I'm doing, I'm just making it one by one. And by the way, if you notice all of these different variables for each of the buttons, each button has its own, it's going to be its own object, right? Oh, I already did that one. So, you know, each button has its own variable, which is actually a negative thing, right? Because, hey, don't we want to make it so that we can, you know, create this interface a little easier? Well, yes, we do, right? But this is the challenge we have. Did I make a mistake? I did not. Here's my plus button, 7 button. And I'm also making them in the global namespace, which some of you may be saying, how come he's making in the global namespace? Isn't there another way to do it? Like, can't you put it somewhere else and pass in this information from one, kind of from one function to another? Absolutely, there's many different ways to do this, but I don't want to scare the pants off of all you people, right? So, you know, I've already scared Ali today. I don't want to do that anymore, right? Because he says he's going to run away from the class. Because he's, you know, I don't want that because he's good, he's smart, right? No, don't do it. He's like, goodbye, I'm out of here. All right, so I think I've got them all. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll know later on. So I've got all these object buttons, and I've got these a couple of bitmaps, the background and the calc container bitmap, as an example. Let's kind of put everything in place now. So I've got my background. My next one is the container, right? So here's my calc container is equal of new create.js dot bitmap. Oops, bitmap, and of course it's going to be assets dot get result. So it's almost like I can paste this as well, right? And of course this is called calc container, and you're going to see a bunch of duplication again and again. I want to make sure that you know this, because otherwise, well, that's almost exact same, right? I've added the container in there, right? I've added these buttons. Oh man, I might as well add everything in there as well. Let's try doing the cut and paste again. Are you guys getting the gist of how this is repetitive? What can I be doing differently here? There are things you can do. There are things you can do. Well, that's not going to solve it. I like your thinking, but that's not going to solve the issue. The issue is I've got different objects, right? And I've got to add them in individually, right? And I have a problem. I have a real problem. Right? I could make it an array, right? I could make it an array, but then I could. But the problem that I have, if I made it an array, right? And this, I'll leave it as the plus button clicked. I'll make everything the same. And by the way, this container is wrong too. I've got to make it so that the container goes to the right place. This container's got to go to 20 by 30, right? So I got to add that in there. So I'm going to say calc container.x is equal to 20. You guys get the picture though, right? Calc container. I won't build the whole thing for you today. I'll have it ready for you on GitHub, but you'll see it everything step by step as I'm just building up my interface here, right? Which is exactly what you're going to be doing when you build up your 240 by 320, your slot machine, 240 by 320, 4 divide button. Okay, let's see what I've gotten there so far, right? So I've got my container, which is at the top, and I've got a couple buttons. And let's run it. And I've worked hard. All right, oh, there's a problem. Hey, how come this is up here and this is up here, and how come it's looking a little different than I'm used to? How come? Well, let's take a look. There's a couple of issues, right? There's a couple of issues. One, my button, right? My button right now is centered in the middle, right? And my picture shows it centered on the top left, right? So don't I need another thing like that for my button where I kind of say, you know, that the absolute position, the centering is on and off, just like I did with my label. So that way I can turn centering on and off for my button, just in case I don't want to center my button. I want an absolute position for my button, top left corner, right? So I need that, and that's why I have this overlap, because it's centering, it's based on the center of my button, not on the top left corner, because I made it that way. So these buttons should actually be centered, they're centered here instead of centered over here. All right, so let's do that. Let's modify my button class and add in that additional feature that I talked about. See how I called it feature and not a failure? Right? And call it into, make a centered value, and we're going to make it a type Boolean, right? And then only if it's centered, right, are we going to center it. So if it's centered, this looks very similar to what we did with our label, though, eh? If it's centered, then, well, we want to do this bounds, check bounds thing. If not, then we'll leave it on the top on the top left corner. So we kind of add that feature into our button now. Okay, cool. Let's go back to my game, and you notice how the buttons. That's why I stopped making the buttons. The buttons are saying there's an error. Well, there is, because we need this a true or false, and we're going to say it's false because we don't want to center them. These buttons. Okay. We're making these custom classes. Let me run it again, and clickety click. Let me see if I've got it. Barba trick. Right, because now they're not centered anymore. So again, I've added in that feature because I want to have the option to center my buttons if I need to, so I can space my buttons anywhere I want, right? But sometimes it's better not to, because I want to absolute position them where I want them. So for your slot machine, everything we do in these slides that I'm doing right now online, you can be using for your slot machine when you make your slot machine buttons. Think about this, and remember, you may or may not want to center these things here, this container, but I can start building my interface. And if you notice, each button has the same options because they're using the button class. They make the same noise right now, right? Doesn't matter, but at the end of the day, they're positioned in the right place. Let me add a couple more, and we'll stop for the day. We'll add our minus and our star. What, you want to go?
No, I want to say something.
What? Tell me.
What if you minimize or start adjusting the screen size?
This screen size here? Oh. Well, let's see what happens. So minimize the screen size. It's already minimal. So I made it 320 by 480 on purpose. So it actually is mobile compliant, right? Because it's 320 by 480. I made it that way, right? But it wouldn't do anything. It won't minimize anything. If I minimize it and maximize it again, what happens is, if you notice, there's a bit of a blip inside of our frame rate, but that's it, right? Let's go back. So let's add in a couple more buttons, the multiply button and the subtract, the minus button, right? So let's do that. I'm just going to copy the divide button here, right? And I kind of put it in a couple times. Right, there's a divide button. I'm defining it twice, right? And this one, I want to make my multiply button. I've got everything here now. Here's my multiply button, right? And I'm going to go back down to the bottom and just replace my multiply button with my different assets here. Aha. This is why I copy and paste, because I can always change it. All right, we'll leave it all as plus button clicked, because that way this makes the same noise. And it's not 320 or 240 by 320. My multiply button is at 240 by 250, so let's change that as well. 240 by 250. And now my minus button is the other one. Yes, I could probably type it, but no, I'm too lazy to do that. I know you want me to type it. You want me to type it in because it's easier, but I'm lazy. All right, so I'm not going to do it my lazy way. What was that? Oh, I know. So here's my minus, and then 240 by 180, right? So 240 by 180 for my minus. Okay, I've got my positioning, right? And I've done it. Let's refresh and see if I've got the other two buttons in there. Yeah. Right, so again, your calculator is starting to come together. I've got my functions. Right, these buttons defined, they all make the same noise right now. right? But eventually we can put the rest of the calculator together and then start making these functions work. Okay. What are we doing here? Why did I do this whole big example today, right? Because just to recap, we did a couple things. We've made our first modules, right? Which we're using TypeScript for. We've made our first classes. I've made 2 classes, a label class and a button class. We've made our configuration constants, right? So I can use a configuration file for our constants. We can change it one place and it'll affect the entire code, right? These are good or best practices, if you will, right? And we're positioning everything. We've made our button class and our label class flexible enough so we can position them absolutely, right? Or center them if we need to from a pivot point perspective, right? These concepts we're going to repeat over and over again. The one concept that we really didn't do today, which I'm going to include later on, is the concept of a sprite sheet. I've added how many into my manifest? Like a bunch of different objects. Well, wouldn't it be better if we had it on one big sheet instead of like a bunch of objects and just reference each of the sheets? And the answer is yes, it would be easier, and this is what we're going to tackle next day. Okay, so for next day, I'm going to have this calculator thing ready to go, and we'll start off with our new slot machine.